time, have also concluded that there's a great deal of relevance to be found in the Book of Enoch. Many teachers such as Chuck Missler, Tom Horn, Doug Hamp, and others have helped reintroduce the Book of Enoch, pointing out things such as the insufficiency and contradictory nature of the, quote, Sethite theory, commonly used for generations to explain away the passages in Genesis 6 that talk about the Nephilim, and how books in the New Testament refer to it as well, the Book of Jude quoting from Enoch directly and calling it prophecy. Indeed, the topic of Enoch, the Nephilim, and how the fallen watchers taught mankind all sorts of wicked knowledge, such as sorcery and astrology, warfare and seduction, is a far more widely accepted idea than it was even just 10 years ago. Secular TV shows such as Ancient Aliens have even helped bring the awareness of this book's existence into the mainstream. Enter the Flat Earth. As most of you know, in the past 6 months or so, the internet has seen a sudden and unexpected exponential rise in the discussion surrounding the question of the true nature of the Earth itself, as well as our universe as a whole. Bolstered by years of questionable NASA footage, an increasing awareness of how much the government and its various agencies lie to the public about all manner of things, and the realization that there are people behind the scenes manipulating virtually every aspect of what we are told is reality, this really shouldn't be all that surprising. Just a few months ago, I would have scoffed at the idea of a flat Earth just as heartily as anyone else. About a year prior to that, I would have still been rolling my eyes at the suggestion that the Apollo missions didn't actually make it to the moon's surface. Rewind 5 years before that, and I was still unable to conceive of the notion that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by elements within the American government itself. In each case, my initial disbelief was confronted by some new piece of data which could not be made to conform to the official narrative. The intrusion of new data would refuse to go away and agitate my thoughts like a burr under a saddle, prompting deeper investigation, until the questions grew into skepticism, and then skepticism grew towards finally having to question and perhaps rethink a framework of beliefs which I had held for a very, very long time. So this is what strikes me as particularly interesting, or rather odd actually, in terms of this current debate going on within the, quote, truth movement around the flat Earth, especially in terms of so many of my fellow Christians, who on the one hand have for years been talking about the Book of Enoch and Genesis 6 and the Nephilim and so on. But now when it comes to this flat Earth issue, I find it really ironic that so many of them appear all too ready to just write it off as a distraction or a psyop or whatever else, and get in line with the scoffers before really doing much in-depth investigation on their own. The reason I find it so ironic is that if you really take a look at all that the Book of Enoch talks about, you will quickly see that it speaks about far more than just the Watchers coming down and creating the Nephilim. The majority of the book actually deals with how Enoch is basically taken and given a tour of the entire cosmos by a heavenly angel, and it's quite hard to deny the degree to which his descriptions fall right in line with the basic ancient Hebrew model of the flat Earth. Enoch describes the Earth as having distinct edges. There are portals and gates at each of the 4 cardinal directions. There are storehouses for certain elements such as the winds, the lightning and thunder, and the frost. It speaks about the 4 corners, about the 4 pillars, and a great deal about the firmament as well, above which is the very throne room of God, just as the typical ancient cosmology reflects. There are literal cave-like pits under the earth, a literal Sheol, as well as another place, a dry desert-like place of chaos which has no water, either above or below it, and outer darkness, where certain angels and spirits are held imprisoned until the day of judgment. Beyond all of this, Enoch speaks a great deal of not only the basic idea of the earth being a plane, covered by the firmament, with water both above and below, but also about how there are all these various orders of angelic beings, who have been assigned different jobs, basically, in accordance with the different physical elements of the earth, sky, heavens, and so on. In this Enochian cosmology, the creation is not merely material and mechanical, but rather vastly multidimensional, and involving the routine participation of immortal, sentient beings in the daily function of all that is going on around us. The sun and moon and stars are all shown to be intentioned by God to follow their assigned circuits, as the spirits assigned to these duties fulfill them. The luminaries are said to even have dwellings or abodes within the heavens, as though they have actual doors in the firmament which lead to their own little angelic apartments. In the context of all of this, I find it most interesting then to consider the idea of the fallen stars, the fallen watcher angels, juxtaposed against the idea of the wandering stars, the bodies today which we call planets. envisioning them to be spherical planetoids millions of miles away, orbiting the sun. But are we sure that's really what they actually are? Do we even have a single photograph of a planet, which hasn't actually been a composite, or just an outright painting or CGI rendering? Anyhow, the fundamental question regarding all this extremely mythological stuff from the Book of Enoch, which speaks of luminaries and firmaments and such, is ultimately this. Is this Enochian cosmology really just a more detailed examination of what already can be found in the biblical description? I find it to be quite parallel to the same sort of question that is so often asked when dealing with Enoch in the context of the Nephilim question. Does the Bible actually already teach this basic idea that the sons of God had offspring with the daughters of men? Like I said, more and more people are beginning to agree that in fact it does. And amazingly, by doing so, are then realizing that by letting this piece back into the biblical puzzle, it actually helps to explain a lot about other parts of the Bible which were previously rather confusing as well, such as the matter of why God commanded the Israelites to wipe out certain tribes entirely from Canaan, or why Paul makes that bizarre comment about women covering their heads because of the angels, or why demons freak out when Jesus threatens to cast them into the abyss, and so on. So when we look seriously at that question, when we start to take a fresh look at the traditional canonical scriptures, suspending for a moment all of our modern assumptions about how it does actually describe a globe Earth, then what do we really start to find? I honestly can't tell anyone what to think, because I do believe this is one of those issues which really is first dependent on one's own predetermined level of openness. It is really pointless to try and force someone to question something which they are internally quite unprepared to question. All I can really speak for is myself, and to the fact that when I actually began to start taking a new look at the Bible, to see if it really could be said to describe not just a globe, but a vast expansive Copernican-esque universe, or instead something which more closely resembles the dome idea, well, I was pretty amazed at what I very quickly began to see. Right off the bat, you can start there in Genesis 1, where it says God hovered over the waters. What waters? Water before an earth? That's weird. And then right there he separates the waters and makes the sky. Right there in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, it's talking about the firmament. The earth was created before even the sun, moon, and stars. Light was created and separated from darkness, before God created any of the light sources. And on it goes from there. You go through books like the Psalms or the Prophets, and see it talking about the corners of the earth being fixed and immovable, the sky being stretched out like a tent. You get to the book of Job, and the last few chapters are intensely descriptive of a dynamic, Enochian, flat earth model. It even mentions things like Leviathan, the massive sea creature, which lurks in the watery depths surrounding the earth's foundations, which is also mentioned in Enoch. In Job, God talks about it like a literal creature. There's really so much to reconsider from this alternative viewpoint. The ascension of Jesus, as well as his triumphant return, where the Bible says everyone on earth will see him in his glory. Just kind of hard to imagine how that works on a ball earth. I think about the Tower of Babel. I reevaluate things like Jacob's ladder. The Star of Bethlehem suddenly seems to make a lot more sense with this cosmology as well. Then you get to Revelation, and again the direct connection between angels and stars is virtually undeniable. How do entire stars fall to Earth if they are millions of miles away, comprised of massive nuclear explosions many times larger than the Earth? How do such falling stars have names and personification? How does the sky actually get rolled up like a scroll? There are so many verses, so many descriptions, which start to take on new life and make a lot more sense when we allow ourselves to consider them through a paradigm that is, yes, rejected and ridiculed by mainstream scientific institutions. The same institutions, remember, which also scoff at anyone who doesn't accept that we're all evolved hairless apes, and that everything in the universe essentially created itself out of one single point of infinitely compressed matter billions of years ago. So the question I would end with is for my fellow Christian brothers and sisters, my fellow students of Bible prophecy, and particularly my fellow adherents of the Genesis 6 paradigm, who are so fond of talking about Matthew 24 and how, as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be, and pointing to the book of Enoch as an authentic, biblically endorsed work that people should take seriously because of all the end times ramifications and implications involving things like transhumanism and alien deceptions and everything else. My question to them is this: how does one pick and choose which portions of First Enoch to take seriously? How can the Nephilim idea be emphasized so heavily and so routinely, even though that in itself is largely rejected and ridiculed both by mainstream Christianity and the secular world, while the bulk of the content in that book would lend great weight to the argument for investigating much further the possibility that the Earth might indeed be flat, and might very well have a dome-like firmament, and the sun, moon, and stars might be very, very close. Why is that summarily rejected? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't get how the, quote, truthers, whether Christian or non for that matter, can make these kinds of statements about how the flat earth issue could destroy the credibility of the truth movement, and so on. Am I confused, or isn't the solitary objective of the truth movement supposed to be the unhindered, unapologetic quest to seek the truth, no matter how laughable or countercultural or conspiratorially wacky it might be to the mass majority? Isn't the idea supposed to be that there are no stupid questions, only stupid assumptions? And I find this particularly weird when it comes to my fellow Christian truthers. I mean, really? You're worried about appearing credible or not looking like a crazy person when you're already talking about things like UFOs being demonic and Nephilim hybrids and CERN being some kind of interdimensional portal that might open up the abyss of Revelation? That ship of perceived credibility has sailed, my friends. It was gone from the mainstream world when you started questioning things like the official narrative of 9/11, and it was even gone from the secular truthers when you started talking about the Bible being true and Jesus dying for our sins, and the book of Revelation being something that is being fulfilled right now before our very eyes. I honestly don't care anymore about being viewed as crazy by other people. I'm not afraid to ask questions that most people would find insufferable, or to entertain notions of conspiracies and cover-ups that most people would reject outright, simply because they cannot allow themselves to imagine that so many millions of people could be all fooled in such a way. But I know we've all been fooled, in all kinds of ways, and I myself have been no exception. I've had to cross that bridge of paradigm reconstruction many times now, and I actually find it much less painful of a process nowadays than I used to. I find it quite amazing, really, that so many people who are seriously questioning the globe model and researching the possibility of the Earth being a plane, doing experiments with curvature and re-examining all the things we've been taught as unquestionable since we first started kindergarten, so many of these folks are not Christian, but atheists, agnostics, or people with all kinds of different spiritualistic beliefs. We've got people believing that our world is just one puddle and that it sits on an infinite plane, like a sheet of ice riddled with an infinite number of other puddle systems. Or other people who basically look at the earth and sky and the heavenly bodies as a huge collection of holograms and mechanistic fakery, the whole dark city concept, and all sorts of other interesting theories about what the world was truly like. So it's quite odd to me that for people who claim to believe in the Bible and take it as literal truth, that we would find such questioning to be at all threatening when we already believe in the realm of the supernatural, in the existence of an eternity beyond our temporal existence, in angels and demons and spiritual warfare between the two. Does the shape of the earth threaten to change any of that? Has anyone started out questioning the globe and by doing so eventually found themselves rejecting the gospel or abandoning the cross because they couldn't find proof that the earth is really curved? I haven't heard a single testimony of that kind as of yet, but I sure have encountered a lot of people who have wound up rejecting the Bible and the Creator in favor of the established, quote, scientific fact of an infinite evolving universe. I know many people today who bristle at the idea of an all-powerful God with his oppressive morality, and instead prefer the prospect of there being millions of other worlds out there, potentially filled with an endless array of other intelligent species and fellow travelers in the evolutionary journey. The Star Trek gospel is a very real thing in our time, and more people are gravitating towards putting their hope in the possibility of having our big brothers from space come along and give us a little evolutionary